all doubled up right now. Got 22 fish on the day.
Yeah,
Look at, see?
hell yeah.
High noon in between. Oh, whoa!
Well, Anthony, how about that? Do you ever think you'd have a tuna fishing day like that?
No. It's straight insanity, start to finish. Just
We
lights
sit
out.
here every week, every Wednesday. We bring you this report where we sit and talk about the amazing fishing everyone else gets to experience. And once in a while, we get a little taste, just a little taste. We got the full feast last week. We went out the end of the week with Captain Rob Taylor, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's do a quick rundown on what's happening right now in the offshore fishing scene for the Northeast.
All right, boys, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, it's wrecked fish on Jeffries mixed in with giants. You got giant tuna being hand-fed in a lot of striper locations along the coast in, Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth area. Typical giant fishing in all the haunts, a little spread out. And then, we've experienced just pure chaos south of the
There
block.
is a small bluefin tuna swarm happening from, let's say, south of Rhode Island, all the way down extended to New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
You have the beginnings of maybe some good yellowfin action happening off New Jersey, great bill fishing in the mid-Atlantic, and it's looking good. And finally, some solid weather where we're getting out there. Guys are actually getting out, getting to pick apart these locations with the fish, consistently find patterns, and even though the wind tends to be a little bit more than forecasted, I know Tuesday, it's supposed to be one of those flat, calm days, was blowing a bit more northwest than they said, but still very fishable. The rest of the week into the weekend is looking pretty good, and
there's some opportunities to fish out ahead. I've had opportunities to get out to the canyons, to get south for skillies, tuna fish, giants inshore. Like, everybody's looking to go over this next week, so we hope you guys get out there. But
as nice as the weather has been, last Thursday, it was one of those trips. So you booked this one. I kind of glommed onto it at the last minute. You booked it with Captain Rob Taylor way back over the winter, early spring. And as we approached the trip, it was looking iffy. We were seeing maybe 5 to 7s and 4 to 6s. The wind was picking up pretty good.
I didn't think we were going to go.
I wasn't sure if we were going to go, and we had kind of a novice crew with us, a crew that has not experienced maybe rough conditions out there. But Captain Rob and his is it 32, 34 Terry Jason, he goes, "We're going. We're good to go." We pounded out, 20, almost 30 miles out of Newport to the tuna grounds, and man, I don't think it was still gray light when the first one. It was one of the.
It was pitch black when
Yeah.
the first puke went over the side. I'll say that. I was calling this the Virgin's trip because I had a buddy who's from South Africa that this is what brought this trip on. He was asking if we could get out and do some, offshore fishing, and if I knew anybody, and I said, I know just the guy. And he was like, I want to book it. He had a couple people bail. That opened the door for me to have my brother come, who's caught tuna before. Not that many, and not that way of light tackle jigging. And
Shots fired at Dr. Dave.
yeah, and then my buddy from Hull, Kev Dunn, tagged along, and you obviously tapped in, and I grabbed, somebody whose name you hear often is Brian Weiss in these weekly reports because he's a regular check-in that spends a lot of time fishing. I brought his older brother, my college roommate, out with us to get him his first tuna, and he never left the beanbag, the poor kid. He was stricken with the seasickness. So we lost 2 on the way out. We basically thought we were going to have 6 guys jigging at the rail all day of Robbie's down east, and we lost a full man and 7/8 of a man.
But yeah, it slowed us down a little bit because we stopped a couple times, let these guys refund their breakfasts. But when we got to the grounds, it was Warren. It was the first timer from South Africa who vomited for 3/4 of the ride out.
So
got
funny.
out there and managed to kind of hold down his lunch just long enough to hook the first tuna of the trip.
Let's set that stage real quick because it was pretty awesome how it happened. We get out there and Robbie's got the window open like a like a Bering Sea captain out there, rolling up and down the waves. He's looking out the window. He's sniffing around, and we catch the first whiff of what should be a slick. And as the wave subsided, we look and there's a slick over there. All right, let's see what else. Then the porpoises came through, and I was like, all right, we're in the life. So as soon as he stopped the boat and set up on that first slick that we liked, he's like, all right, fellas, have at it. Me, my brother, you, and Kev, we're all kind of going back and forth. I think your pick was Dave to my brother to hook his first fish. Kev was saying that I was going to hook up first. I don't know if anybody had you, Jim. You were flying under the radar. But we were kind of like, placing some wagers on who would get tight first. We stopped the boat. We're fishing for a good 4 minutes, and all of a sudden, from the dead arises big Warren Owen from South Africa, lives here in town, and he goes over, and I make eye contact with him, and he reaches for a rod, and he goes, just drop this down. I'm like, yeah. So he literally turns around a minute and a half later and goes, am I doing this right? And all of a sudden you see him go right over the side. He's like, oh, I got one. My brother exclaims, 1,000-to-1 odds. Nobody had him. It was hilarious. That probably proved to be the line of the day.
The am I doing this right was his second fish.
That's right.
So I'm a slow starter. I'm a little slow out of the gate on a lot of tuna trips. I think it's because I am just so desperate to catch one that I'm doing everything wrong from the beginning. I didn't catch one for 2 hours. Everyone on the boat had everyone who dropped the jig at this point had hooked multiple fish. And Warren he's working his jig up, and he goes, hey, Jim, am I doing this right? And I'm about to I'm trying to think of a way to be like, well, I would adjust this in a way. And like all of a sudden the fish hits. I was like, yeah, you're doing it fine. You're doing it fine. And that was when I started getting a little grumpy that I hadn't hooked up. But I had a strong finish.
You and Dave were slow starters.
Yeah.
You guys literally found your own space on the boat, and me, Warren, when he was up at the rail, which was probably for no more than an hour and 15 minutes of the trip that he actively fished. He still managed to hook 4, I think. And then, me and Kev were kind of, and Warren were catching fish, and you and Dave were sitting there muttering to each other over in the corner.
And then we ended that finally with a doubleheader, which is, and from there it just went even crazier. And this was something.
That's right.
This is one of those things that kind of separates like captains like Rob Taylor from guys who aren't out there very often. Like, we're catching fish. We were picking away at fish, maybe 1 or 2 bites every drift. And we were, because it was rough, it limited the number of boats out there. There were probably 3 or 4 other boats, big game
the
from
Bakers
Rhode Island.
were out there.
Marity Fishing was also out there. But we're in this kind of loosely scattered fleet where we're hooking up pretty regularly. And Rob's always looking. He's always looking for something better. He's always looking for greener grass.
Yeah.
And even though that grass seemed plenty green to us catching fish, like I said, somebody was hooking fish every drift. He moves. He goes, okay, I just want to poke this way. I see some whales.
About a mile.
I see something. So we move a little ways. And on that first drop, we tripled up. Mm-hmm. And then that's when we really started to rack up the hookups. It was the craziest tuna jigging I've ever experienced in my life, where it was good enough that we started experimenting different lures, different retrieves. It was so good. Most of those fish, 90% of the fish we caught, were in that, I'd say, between 32 and 35 inches. There seems to be just an absolute massive amount of bluefin tuna that size, which is great to see. If they keep coming back to these waters, we're going to be able to watch them get a little bit bigger every year until I remember Captain Eric Stewart used to say, back when there was the bluefin tuna boom in the early 2000s, he watched these fish come east of Chatham, and every year they'd get a little bigger. And he was nervous. He goes, when they reach giant size, when they become adults, above 73 inches, he doesn't know where they go. They scatter. They go all over the place. He said, so he likes when there's a big number of these smaller ones because you'll be able to watch them. They should keep coming back. And seeing tuna that size, I mean, a 35-inch bluefin tuna is a ton of fun on the light jigging tackle. We caught a couple, I'd say, in the mid-40-inch range. One landed one over a 55-inch bluefin, which was a beautiful fish. And just, as many fish as you wanted to hook.
We caught them on the metals. We were able to experiment with you started fluking for them, throwing basically a soft plastic on a jig head, and then I grabbed a Z-Man Heroes and kind of put that on a head and was just kind of teasing it up from the bottom and getting smoked left and right. Awesome sand eel imitation, and that was a fun bite.
Yeah, and the Ronzi did really well.
Yep.
I mean, the Ronzi is the heavyweight champion of pelagic plastics. I mean, there's no better soft plastic bait than that. But it gave us a chance to use some different things and try those out. The Z-Man Hero Z, made from Elastec, that's something I've wanted to put in front of tuna for a long time. But the trips I tend to go on, it's like, well, we're scratching up a couple fish, so you don't want to experiment. Here, we had so many.
The fee flicker.
The
fee flicker was born.
We don't need to talk about that. We were getting a little goofy out there trying different retrieves, but everything worked. And we thought, maybe that's because it was a rough day, because there were few boats out there. Talking to guys in recent days, talked to Captain Kevin of Blue Line Sport Fishing yesterday, and he is continuing to rack up really impressive numbers of bluefin. What's changed down there is while it was all a jig and plastic spite, guys are now catching them on topwater poppers as well. It's like you wouldn't have thought it could get better, but it's somehow gotten better. Now I expect those numbers. I expect things to kind of mellow out a little bit because we've got nice weather. You're going to have more boats,
a lot more pressure. It should spread the fishing out a little bit.
It'll spread the fishing out, and it'll benefit guys who, like Captain Rob, want to go and find something out on their own, something that's they're willing to leave the pack and look for something else.
Man, he's fun to watch work. He was very calculated in not allowing people to drop when we had doubles, because he's like, let me see what these fish do, and I'll give you the all clear sign if we mark below. And honestly, you want to hook as many tuna as possible, right? That's how I'm wired. That's how a lot of us are wired. But taking that approach, it was quickly evident that there was strategy behind that, because when you get tangles, you lose gear, you lose jigs, you take combos that are, ready, turnkey and ready to go, and take them out of the mix. Now this rod, because it broke off here, needs a new FG, a new leader. It just saves you so many headaches to kind of slow it down and be strategic through what you're doing and not bite off more than you could chew, because we could have had quads and, quintuplet hookups if we wanted, if Rob let us. But before we get too much further into the report, as always, the report is brought to you by SiriusXM Marine. Fish mapping is SiriusXM Marine's most comprehensive plan and is available on your boat's display and includes access on your phone or tablet via the fish mapping app. You have to be subscribed to Sirius fish mapping to get the app. Serious anglers use every advantage available. Sirius XM marks the spot where bait fish gather and game fish hunt. Learn more at SiriusXM.com/fish mapping. Also sponsoring Garmin Marine, check out the Panoptix PS70 stainless steel through-hull transducer. It's powered by Garmin's rapid return sonar, which gives you live sonar views up to 1,000 feet below the surface. Imagine what that would have looked like under the boat with live sonar. See fish live, catch fish deep, Garmin.com. And last but not least, who you'll hear from later in this report, is from the Canyon Runner, which gives us their typical rundown of fishing inshore all the way out to the edge. Stay tuned for the full report from Canyon Runner. But I'm going to kick it to you, Jim. You got some stuff down south that you wanted to cover.
Yeah, so Atlantic Tackle down there in Sunset Marina in Ocean City, Maryland. They were one of the hubs of the White Marlin Open. We talked a little bit about that. It was very early on in the tournament when we discussed it last week. It wrapped up on Friday. The bill fishing was tremendous. At the time we spoke last when we did the report last week, 100 white marlin had been caught.
Wow.
None of the qualifying size. They'd all been too small. Somebody did weigh one in, and they ended up being too small. That they did finally get some fish that qualified. The winner of the tournament was a 77-pound white marlin. Really nice fish. That was good enough for $3.6 million. That was a boat out of North Carolina, took that home. But boat from Point Pleasant, New Jersey, the Blue Runner, got a 220-pound big eye to lock up $1.1 million for the biggest tuna category. So there was some big blue marlin in there worth $500,000. And pretty much good fishing all around down there in those mid-Atlantic canyons for the billfish. Moving up to New Jersey, I talked to Cristiano at the Real Seat. He said he was out on Sunday, this past Sunday, and he trolled a bunch of those same-size bluefin, mid-30-inch bluefin, about 20 to 30 miles out. He said there was an absolute mess of them right up until this most recent blow. He said then those numbers kind of tapered off. He did good on Sunday, went back out to the same area on Monday, lots of boats, no tuna. He moved around a little bit, decided to go and do some mahi and bonito fishing. Ended up catching a 39-inch cobia, which isn't a bad consolation prize.
Not at all.
He said they went up to a lobster pot where they were looking for mahi, and they're throwing little epoxy jigs and a cobia. Actually, he said 4 cobia fired off it. One of them ate, and they landed that one. So that's
Damn.
pretty cool. Speaking of mahi, we haven't talked very much about the mahi so far this season. At Monster Ledge off New Jersey, every pot right now sounds like it's loaded, according to Cristiano. He said that there's a ton of them. The downside is they are 10 to 15 inches long, so very small. Not even chickens, they're chicks.
Yeah.
But the good news about mahi is they grow so fast. I mean, mahi can grow about 2.5 inches per week. So in a couple weeks, some of those fish might be a more respectable size for light tackle, or at least more respectable size for taking home and eating, turning into fish tacos.
Yeah, I was BSing with Willie, and he had the same sentiment. Willie Hatch had the same sentiment about the mahi up this way that he was finding. Very small peanut mahi.
Yeah, some years you see some good-sized ones early, in late. I've done trips with Joe Cermelli and Eric Kerber right after ICAST.
Yep.
So it would be late July where we've gone out and caught lots of good-sized mahi in late July. Lately, it seems like you see smaller ones until you get closer to September.
Yeah.
I also got a report from, just pulling that up right now, from Mike Leeson of Tack Waterman. He said the last couple days off New Jersey, there's been a great popper bite for yellowfin tuna. That's something that we haven't heard too much about in recent days. Last year at this time, we were talking about the mixed bag of bluefin and yellowfin at the dump all the way down to New Jersey. Yellowfin have been a bit of a no-show on the midshore grounds. I think those guys might be pushing a little bit further out to find the yellowfin right now off New Jersey. And then Mike also echoed that there's a lot of those small bluefin mix in with some bigger fish on the midshore grounds down there. Moving up to Montauk, Mike at Star Island Marina up there, pretty much what we saw. Tons and tons of bluefin tuna. He said it is a short ride out of Montauk, 15 to 18 miles. Guys are getting on these fish. He goes, how do you want to catch them? You want to catch them on jigs? We'll catch them on jigs. Want to get them on the troll? Go ahead and troll them up. He said bait. You do it whatever you want. He said you're catching a ton of these small bluefin. He said they were 20 to 100 pounds is the size range he was seeing, which is pretty much what we saw, but mostly more leaning toward that 20-pound range. I'd say maybe 25, 30 pounds. He said there are fish in the tails, in the fish tails. Mm-hmm. There's fish out to East Atlantis. But he said most guys, you've got to run past the mother load of tuna.
Yeah.
And while some guys do have they want to get the billfish, the swordfish, big eye yellowfin, you're going to run past it for that. But he said the midshore yellowfin, the light tackle yellowfin, guys haven't really bothered looking because they've got that great bluefin tuna fishing close to home. He said he's even heard of people leaving the dock around noon or 1 o'clock, going out there, catching 10 fish and coming home. Absolute fishing. Banker's hours, tuna fishing.
Yeah, if you haven't caught a tuna and you've been wanting to catch one, even if you don't have the proper gear, grab yourself a slim profile, metal jig and get out to one of those areas, whether you're going out of Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, Massachusetts.
The closest you're going to get to them right now is out of Block Island or out of Montauk, it sounds like. But they'll move around. We've got the wind coming. We've got various storms moving through. So these fish will continue to follow the bait, but they're in among the whales. There's tons of sand eels out there. And, we caught some whiting even the whiting in there were spitting up sand eels where we, the silver hake. So that is what Mike at Montauk said. Mike at Star Island Marina said out of Montauk. So very good bluefin tuna fishing. But also if you want to push to the canyons, there are fish in the tails and East Atlantis. We'll hear more about that from Captain Dean of Canyon Runner.
I reached out to Goose Hummock. I talked to Griffin. He said Giants in the Bay have been primarily on the Pogey schools off the power plant in Plymouth. That's been a pretty popular hotbed for those fish blitzing the Pogey schools. Nauset's had a mix of giants with wrecked fish. It's all bait. 107-incher was caught yesterday on a mackerel by one of the Goose Hummock customers. The sword has been dead. He said the sword's been dead for 2 years. I keep asking to try to find out anything that's been kind of sign of life out that way.
It was so good out there a couple years ago. The sword was you could not wait to get back out there.
It was a good place to go and jig a giant. And if you got there early enough, you had a shot at wreck first thing in the morning.
And there were 2 or 3 years that it was so good out there. It's amazing. But I wonder, it's going to turn on at some point. Maybe it's going to be in October. Maybe it's going to be next week. But at some point, those fish will show
Been
up
dead
there.
for 2 years, so we're due.
It has not been dead.
No,
for 2
I know.
years.
There's
It
been
was
flurries
lit
of
up in
fish
June.
in there. I know that. Crab has been slowish, but still some fish they reported. Said some customers have been talking about getting into white marlin with regularity south of the vineyard when they can get back there, and lots of people gearing up to hit the edge this week with the window to do so being there. So that was from the Goose Hummock. And
One quick note on the giant tuna thing. I also heard from my neighbor Nick, and he's good friends with Damon Sacco, Castafari,
Yeah.
absolute kind of an offshore legend up here.
of course,
Said he was out in Cape Cod Bay trying to get on some of those bunker blasting giant tuna, and he said there were about 40 boats on it. Only saw one hook up, and I said how? I said how is it not automatic? He said well it's a little bit different when you're fishing in 40 feet of water.
Yeah.
He goes that those fish are coming out of the deep, sweeping in through that school and coming out. The odds of getting them to see your bait in such shallow water, it's not like they're looking up
Yeah.
and there's your stray bunker. They are looking across, so
Yeah.
it's a much more narrow window to get that fish to see your bait.
it does change things. I had a hard time wrap my mind around that. That's why I set up at 90 to 100 feet the last time I got out there, thinking, you're going to have more visibility out here. The fish have to be coming in from somewhere to blitz those schools. So hopefully I'm in their path. I wasn't.
We saw some posts too of some of the run and gun guys who are out there on Cape Cod Bay. And it's kind of a cast if you dare situation. He said most of the fish are in that 100-inch
Some guys
range.
came rigged for a heavyweight fight and got it done with giants.
The guys who are experienced
stick
and
baits.
with that type of
Sammy was
tackle.
up here doing it.
Yeah, Sammy Gondor of
Yep.
Salty Waters Tackle.
Yep.
He's somebody who's got a lot of experience fighting big
Fish
tuna
of all
on light
sizes.
gear, and but for your average Jim and Cheech, fighting a 100-inch on spinning gear is not going to end well for you or the fish.
I'm not even sure I want that abuse. I mean, the 30 to 40-inch class fish with the numbers that we experience, that kind of.
I've got bruises right here from where you poked. I can't imagine a 100-inch on
questionable.
spinning gear.
That was my status heading into the next game is game time decision, because for the next handful of days I was a little sore. But I talked to Connor down in Weymouth, Monahan's Marine, great shop down that way. South of Block Island, obviously rat bluefin are plentiful. That's been the theme throughout a lot of this. Haven't heard anything from the edge of the blow over the last week, but it looks like the eddy out east has finally pushed up onto the edge and should start heading west. He said, if I was planning an offshore trip, I'd be looking at Linden and Powell, but that's likely out of range for many, but it has the water. Bluefin in the Mass Bay area, Stellwagen seems to be normalizing since that inshore Nahant Deer Island bite has cooled off from what he's heard. And he said, when it comes to bait, seems to be the same story. Bunch of pogies around. If you're looking for max and herring, hit your normal spots, but you're likely going to need to get there an hour on either side of sunrise before they end up disappearing and becoming more difficult. So he kind of talks about, what that plan for a canyon trip may look like with this window out ahead. I'm going to kick it to the Canyon Runner and let them do their thing. But first and foremost, the Canyon Runner sport fishing team, they're here to help you catch fish. They offer coaching and concierge services, seminars, and a virtual captain system, which will exponentially help you increase your catches inshore, midshore, and out to the canyons. The report they provide gives you a sampling of what their virtual captain system looks like, which serves as your co-captain, providing all the fish catching and safety intel, including a built-in warning system and more. If it gives you the ability to track over 400 member boats in real time, plus 15 pro staff boats. So when it comes to putting a plan together, you have all of those resources to say, well, this boat did this, that boat did this, and you can start to pull together a game plan with their help through their concierge service. You can check them out at canyonrunner.com, and we'll let Canyon Runner take it away.
Good afternoon, OTW. This is Dean Lambros from Canyon Runner Coaching Members Concierge Fishing Report Service, giving you our weekly fishing report for the week of August 4th through August 11th. As you can see here on our boat map, it was a slow week by most standards, as weather was very difficult. We had a hurricane coming up the coast this past week that affected most of Florida and some of the Southern Carolinas. And we also had the white marlin open. We did have members fishing in the tournament as well. Starting with the southern canyons, we saw limited billfish being captured, big blue marlin, white marlin, and mahis coming out of the deep and off the pots in our local canyons. The star of the tuna show was the big eye tuna in the Wilmington Canyon. Moving northern in the canyons, we had limited canyon coverage, mostly due to the wicked forecast. So that would represent the Spencer Canyon all the way through Lincoln, Toms, Hudson, Dip, Fishtails, the Atlantis Canyon region, beach hydrographers. Finally, by midweek, we had another tournament based out of Nantucket, and we saw great yellowfin, big eye, and marlin action out in the eastern canyons from Lydonia through Munson, just west of the Hagon, as there's a large pocket of blue water from the mid-70s to the low 80 degrees. Working midshore, it was pretty slow from Virginia Beach all the way up to Barnegat Inlet, with most of those boats fishing for inshore species. On the midshore tuna front, east of Barnegat through the New York Bight, we saw another great showing of school bluefin tuna in the shipping lanes, as well as an occasional giant bluefin being caught in the shipping lanes all the way through the New York Bight as well, which has been spectacular. Sharks have been difficult, and we're starting to hear more and more sharks either eating tunas or eating the tackle while trying to catch those tunas and bait. Working eastward, straight off Shinnecock Inlet due south of Montauk, another great pocket of bluefin tuna has showed up there. As you can see, we have our members' boats fishing both those locations, and we're also seeing fish southeast of Block, so the Gully and Tuna Ridge area, and Dump as well. Working our way east and north, locally off Cape Cod, Nauset Beach, Regal Sword, Crab Ledge. It's become a bit of lottery fishing. In other words, it's fairly random, mostly big fish, 90 to 105-inch fish. We're seeing very minimal amount of small bluefin tuna, school-sized tunas in this location at this point. Moving northern off Provincetown, Stellwagen, Jeffreys Bank, again, giant tuna fishing persists with great action. Moving off of northern Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine, same thing. Giant bluefins being caught with regularity. It has been hit or miss in that area this year, though. We have not seen the same caliber of action we have in past years. We hope to see fishing to continue to improve as we get closer to this moon phase and into September. Thank you again.
So picking things back up from the Canyon Runner, thanks for that report. I talked to Joe from Fisherman's Outfitter in Gloucester, and he had a little pep in his step. He was excited about kind of what was going on. He said there's been a steady pick. It's been spread out, not too concentrated, but Southern Jeffries, Scantum, up in the Cove. It's been spotty, but there's been fish spread out throughout all of the tuna grounds that his customers frequent. Like, they service a lot of the giant tuna guys, a lot of the commercial guys, as well as that whole kind of North Shore, group of fishermen, whether they're wreck fishing or not. And he said Boston Harbor giant thing has been really cool. We've seen plenty of videos from that. He's seen a lot of, heard of a lot of his customers getting on that bite. Kind of luck of the draw type of deal. Same thing that they're doing in Plymouth and other areas. They're just hanging out with the bass. I was talking to Brian Coombs, and we were joking about, like, the bass and the porpoises and the whales and the tuna must have, like, all gotten on the same page because they have the biomass of Menhaden, a bunker, all corralled in, like, they got them closed off. So there's nowhere for them to go, and they're just going in and blitzing them while creating this wall of predators that won't let the pogies out of this bay.
What this got to be the worst place for a bait fish to get
Imagine.
stuck up among all those islands and everything.
Pretty wild. So Joe elaborates from again from Fisherman's Outfitter in Gloucester on Tillies and outies having some wreck fish, not on the surface though. These bites are coming at 60, 75 feet and deeper on bait. And he said if you're looking for a stand-up fight with sharks, he goes, it's been great. He said there's been plenty of blue dogs and poor beagles, but there's been a couple of threshers and small makos in the mix. So a little bit of a shark buffet as far as variety.
We haven't covered as much sharking in this report this year as
There's pockets of people that have been, kind of targeting the threshers out of Connecticut.
I miss doing it. I miss the real deal offshore sharking. It's very fun. It's a cool way, but it is like, you're going to do this or you're going to run a little bit further and actually catch some tuna on like tackle. It loses that battle there. But
growing up, it was always a good plan B for tuna failure. It was like, all right, that slack tide has passed. I don't want to sit here and do nothing the rest of the day. Let's go to some shark grounds and throw a bucket over the side and pull on some fish. It's a good fallback option, but it's fun to do anyways. I mean, the Duke out of Connecticut, converted kayak aficionado, has got himself a boat, and he's been catching some really big threshers on the light gear, kind of near shore. And those videos have been pretty amazing to see such a big animal with that tail, wreak havoc on during the end game. But kind of finishing things off with what Joe had to say from the Fisherman's Outfitter in Gloucester. He said the northwest corner has had some fish that roll through. It's a bait and weight deal. Make sure to keep checking your bait, and this is where it kind of gives you some really good advice. For making bait, doing so inshore is the prudent move. Get max or pogies inshore before you get to the place that you're going to set up shop, but don't sleep on the whiting and the herring, or maybe even lucking into some squid out on the bank or while on those offshore tuna grounds, because if you're out there, might as well kill some time in between marks, seeing what you can add to the bait offering. He said it's good to have a diverse menu of baits on the hook. Also put some thought in what baits are fished where. More so for keeping the bait lively and healthy on the hook. If you're going to put a whiting down or something, that should be fished close to the bottom. That's where the fish came up from. It's going to respond better to that depth and that temperature of water, whereas a mackerel can pretty much be fished anywhere in the water column. So, put some thought behind what you're putting out there and where. And he says it's a smart move to find your bait inshore so you don't get stuck with bait issues, which is a kiss of death tuna fishing. Lastly, I talked to Captain Bob from Seacoast, New Hampshire Sport Fishing, and he's just getting going again after the storm paused some things. Few giants since the storm, but boats just starting to get out and fish again. A bait game with no surface feeds of late, and he said he may try dead sticking Arons or Nomad squid treks tomorrow while he's live lining, which is always kind of a good play. He said right now there's a mix of wreck and giants, and the most action is spread across Jeffries, and a colleague fishing for giants on Northern Jeffries released 3 wreck fish yesterday. So pretty good sign if you're looking for those wreck fish to get out to Jeffries and have a look out there. He said other boats in the same area netted a total of 3 giants across 12 boats. So, pretty good success rate there. And the wreck fish have been mostly found on the south side of Jeffries. Man, I can't help but want more of that light tackle tuna scene. I actually sent a buddy who's been he's getting married this weekend, and we were joking. Kid used to work here, Pat Donovan, real close friend to all of us. He fishes with his father-in-law, and he's like, dude, you got to send me to catch a tuna. I can't get married a little boy. I have to be married as a man, and a man has to have a tuna under his belt to be considered one. And they went out there. They left out of Barnstable and went all the way south of the block and hooked one within 20 minutes, broke it off, and he was despondent, he said. And they hooked another one, messed that up at the boat, and then finally he hooked a third, and they got it done for his first tuna, and they ended up getting 5 bites, coming home with their 2 unders, so that was real cool. And so shout out to Tony Nanny and Pat Donovan for getting it done. Also heard from at Sea Hunt with 2 T's, who was out there either the Friday or Saturday after we fished with Robbie, and that was the first glimpse of somebody dialing in the popper bite. So when I saw his post, we had been exchanging DMs over the course of the season, and I reached out and I'm like, oh, you dialed in the popper bite. We hadn't been able to do that yet. we didn't really stick with it long enough on any of our trips.
Did you throw poppers at all?
Twice with Rob.
It was one of those where you knew they were down deep. We were seeing some higher
He
up
threw it a
marks,
couple
and
times,
it's
too.
like, how do you have the stomach to watch everyone else hook up
No.
on the jig while you're throwing the popper, waiting for that one bite? I know I did. You had it for 2 casts.
We didn't, and then when we were out with Blinkoff and Jonah on Ty Rainey's boat on the Conch, I threw the popper up probably a half dozen times until I abandoned it because it was just, it didn't happen and everything else was working. The vertical jig thing was working. But when I reached out to him, he was like, oh, my God, it's insane. Huge dolphin feeds. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to try the popper. And boom, got smoked. After that, it was automatic. Every single cast behind the dolphins, he got bit. They outlasted the fleet, and it ended up going until 6 p.m., not a single boat around, quadded up every cast into the dolphins. That was what was getting it done on the popper side of things.
There's something about that back half of the day trip. I know when the tuna fishing was better on Stellwagen, the light tackle stuff was better on Stellwagen and Cape Cod Bay. There were guys that would wait for the fleet to start coming in the early afternoon, and they would head out and they'd have basically the fish to themselves. The one challenge is that typically in the summer, the wind kicks up in the afternoon. You're going to have a bumpier ride out and a bumpier ride home.
Yep.
But if you can pick the right day, you'll have those grounds to yourself. And
that little break in
fishing
pressure
really
makes
good.
sense, given the fish the willingness to come up and eat a popper. I mean, when we were doing it with on Ty's boat, had to be 200 boats out there. So it makes sense that wasn't going to happen. I bet you if we stuck with it when we were fishing with Robbie and there was only 4 or 5 other boats out there, we probably would have gotten some bites, especially when the porpoises rolled through. I did make at least one cast into them, and he did too.
If we ever got tossed the keys to the on-the-water regulator, I think that would be the first thing I'd do. Try to do a banker's hour bluefin trip. Plan on instead of driving out in the dark, driving in the dark and see. For something like we have going on right now, where you know there's a ton of fish, but there's going to be a lot of pressure, and seeing if that late afternoon into early evening bite would.
I'd probably go in the other direction. There's a lot of boats heading out Wednesday and Thursday and Friday looking for skillies south of
which is
Muskegon
white
Channel,
marlin.
White marlin.
To everyone else except.
Except for this local area. The old name for them was skillies because the old sword boat, stickmen used to practice on the white marlin and test their, it was like their
Is that true?
That we heard about that on a podcast from somebody that was part of that group that pioneered that swordfish harpoon fishery, and he said that's where the name came from.
So I thought I knew it was a kind of an old Portuguese fisherman's word for it. I assumed it was something, a translation thing. That
was the first time I ever heard it, and I go, oh, that actually makes sense of why they call them that. He said they call them skillies because they're hard to harpoon, and it would get you dialed in, and that was your practicing grounds because there was so many of them, and there was a small market for them, at the market where they could take them and sell them, and they would practice on the white marlin.
Was this Captain Eric?
This was Captain Eric. Practice on the white marlin, and then, once they had confidence in their guy on the pulpit, they would go out looking for sunning swords and, kind of knock the rust off with the skillies.
Those are different days we're talking about where you are practicing your harpoon throwing on white marlin.
So that bite seems to have shaped up, from Gordon's Gully to, that water bumping up against the cold water off the shoals. There's a lot of boats heading out there, and that's probably what I would do if I was tossed the keys to one of the on-the-water boats. I'd go with a live well full of scup and look for those big hatchet fins milling around out there and present a bait that they couldn't refuse. But you got anything else, Jim?
That's it for me this week.
Likewise. In closing, I want to kick it to the socials. We had at FV_Valiant tag myself and Jim and On the Water. They were out with at dying_breed_sport fishing on the Instagrams, and basically after an hour and a half of a losing battle with a pogie-fed giant a little further offshore, they were headed to the barn when Captain Riley of Dying Breed Sport Fishing spotted schools of pogies getting slashed by giants. They ran up to it, snagged a pogie, and before the leader was out, a 106-inch, 627-pounder took the leader right out of Riley's hand, and they were tight. We got some footage to leave you with. Enjoy, and until next week, catch them up, guys.
Oh my God. That was quick.
I told you I need one. I felt it pull right out of my hand. I'm like, yeah, we're on. There's still fucking
Oh my God.
I got like 80 to 100 yards though. Oh, you lucky son of a bitch. You lucky green bastard. Oh my God, I just want to throw it at it.